Hi there, I'm Joey from EDHREC, and this is your sign that it's okay to take that card out of your deck if you want to. Every so often, I see comments of this variety floating around in the Magic ecosystem. Quote, Cyclonic Rift is a card I play in all my blue decks, and I always hold it in my hand instead of playing it, because it doesn't feel fun to cast. Honestly, big mood, and big same. This happens to me too, and if it happens to anyone else out there, then I just wanted to make a short video that might serve as some sort of encouragement about it. And of course, real quick, I gotta give a short reminder to please like and subscribe. The numbers don't lie. When we remind people about it, more people do it, so we're leaving value on the table if we don't, honestly. So yeah, give it a click. It's a good feeling, I promise. Now let's get to the point. Do you ever find yourself in situations like that comment described, where you're holding on to a card because it just doesn't feel good to play? Like maybe you draw it and then you're like, huh. You know, it doesn't feel like the right game for this one. So then you sandbag it and maybe you never cast that spell that game. You effectively turn that card into a blank in your hand. I know this happens to me. I've had it happen before with stuff like Rift, stuff like Dockside Extortionist. I draw those cards and then immediately I'm like, man, I don't want to win a game this way. I want a card that's going to make my opponents go, whoa, not a card that's going to make my opponents go, oh. Over time, I've taken out a lot of those types of cards from my decks, though I certainly have not taken out all of them from all of my decks. And I do think it is important to point out that there are going to be certain categories of cards that may more easily produce this type of scenario than other types of cards will. For example, a Torment of Hailfire or a Tutor finding me a win con, those are going to more obviously create a repetitive form of gameplay because they are the way that the game is ending, and that's something that I might clue in on a little bit more quickly than even say like an Aura Shards, which is a very powerful card, but it might take me a little bit longer to notice, oh wait, that's actually locking my opponents out of the game because now they're not able to play the cool stuff that they wanted to, and is that the game experience that I really wanted in this game? And both of those are completely different monsters to, for example, cards that make a whole bunch of treasures and just are very, very powerful value engines. Each one of those could be a thing that becomes an egregious powerhouse type of card that maybe I feel a little bit awkward about playing, but they will present themselves in very different ways at very different times. Now, there are plenty of folks who will think this is crazy talk. Why would you cut amazing cards from your deck? And if that's where you're at, then honestly, hell yeah. If you don't encounter situations like this, then that's freaking awesome. This video is not by any means telling anyone that you should cut cards like that. Not at all. All I want to briefly examine is why we sometimes will still run cards in our deck, even if we have noticed multiple moments where we felt awkward about casting them, where we noticed that we didn't actually want to play these in a game. Why do we sometimes feel a resistance to the idea of cutting those powerhouse cards, even if we ourselves don't necessarily always enjoy them? Well, reason number one is probably just price. These cards are expensive. It often takes a lot of effort to get big powerhouse effects like these, so we don't want to be too flippant about cutting them, right? It might feel like we're squandering a whole bunch of work or something. So yeah, price is a very fair reason. It can feel really tough to part with those big collectibles, so certainly don't if you don't want to. I'll just state for myself that I think it was helpful when I reminded myself to disconnect price from my evaluation of whether or not a card is good in my deck and whether or not it's fun to play, because sometimes those big numbers can really bias our impressions. And also for myself, it's been helpful not to feel as though those costs are sunk and to feel like those things are locked in necessarily. I've enjoyed the times where I was able to turn or trade one pricey card that I felt a little bit weird about casting into a different pricey card that I love playing. Reason two that people might feel a little bit weird about cutting cards is possibly because of, for instance, other people saying that it'd be dumb to cut those cards, or that you should play XYZ and yada yada deck. I mean, honestly, even the numbers on EDHREC can sometimes make you feel weird for going against that grain. But we've said it plenty before. The only thing that you, quote, should play is what you like. Not even EDHREC treats EDHREC numbers like their prescription. And even when we as players seek out deck advice from other people, we're not seeking their approval, we're just looking for more ideas that will help us have more fun. So feel encouraged to prioritize that over the potential pressure of what other people think. I mean, heck, you think if I cared what strangers think about me, I'd have ever come out the closet, or that I'd be making YouTube videos? Your deck is yours. Don't let someone else tell you what it ought to be. But reason number 3, I think, is the biggest reason why we sometimes continue to play cards in our decks that we don't even enjoy playing all the time in a game. And I think it's because psychologically we feel a little bit more secure having a contingency plan of like a bomb card or two in our back pocket just in case. Just in case we encounter a game where, for example, someone said that their deck would do one thing, but then it skyrocketed in a different direction and it's taking over the game completely instead. Having a Rift style spell, a huge powerhouse bomb like that to break apart that board that's trying to lock everyone else down, for example, having that can feel really satisfying. It's like, I'm glad I wasn't completely unprepared. Even if I don't want to cast this card in 99% of the games that I play, I'm glad that my deck contains an answer for this 1% type of moment. Honestly, that's a really good justification. If there are a lot of cards that you're playing in your own decks that fit that type of description, then I think that you're well prepared for the games that you're going to play. And I think you're probably playing those games really, really well. I'm certainly not saying that's a bad reason. All I want to examine here, I guess, is whether or not sometimes that emotion can feel so great, that desire to have those backup plans can be such a big driving force that it occasionally puts our brains on autopilot a little bit. Like, here's the thing I've encountered. Even in those moments where someone did, for example, misrepresent what their deck was doing, and it felt nice to have prepared a backup plan that could very easily take apart what their strategy was doing, even in those moments, I still noticed that I felt kind of weird about casting those cards. I've noticed over however many hundreds of games that I've played that I sometimes wind up having a more enjoyable time when I don't have that easy big bomb solution in my back pocket. And when I need to put in a little bit more elbow grease to actually find a clever solution to dismantle whatever's going on, whether I need to do very clever sequencing or whether I need to work more with everyone else at the table, stuff like that. And even if I don't actually find an answer, getting so close to finding one can also still be really, really cool, and I end up feeling really satisfied when trying to puzzle out those moments. It reminds me of why I'm playing Magic in the first place. This won't be the case for everyone, and I'm certainly not saying that this attitude is what everyone, quote, should feel about Magic. Not at all. It's just a joy that I've learned I really enjoy paying attention to that kind of thing. And speaking for myself, I also know that even if I encounter those types of games where having that thing in your back pocket would be really, really clutch, I still might not draw them anyway. So forcing myself to definitely not be able to rely on them also is kind of fun, if that makes any sense. But more than that, here's something else that can sometimes happen in those situations like that commenter described, where you're holding on to, for example, a card like Cyclonic Rift, and you don't want to cast it because you realize, that's kind of the wrong energy for this game, I don't really want to do that to this game, whatever. Sometimes when you're holding on to those things or sandbagging it, don't want to play it, what can happen is that maybe someone plays a wheel and forces you to discard it, and then it's face up in your graveyard where everyone can see it, and then everyone's like, wait, why didn't you cast that? If people realize that you were holding back, pulling your punches, that's not really a great feeling for everyone. Pulling punches absolutely has a time and place. For a very easy example, if you've ever taught someone new how to play Magic, you probably know that it's not a great experience to go pedal to the metal the whole time. You got to give them room to experiment. You got to let them experience peaks and valleys to help get them excited to learn more. But you know never to reveal that you might have been pulling your punches because you don't want to puncture their joy. So in regular Commander games, if I am holding it back a little because I notice everyone is just kind of taking it easy, I want to make sure that I'm not putting myself into any positions where it becomes like 1,000,000,000% obvious that I'm holding back. And some of those bigger obnoxious spells, or just some of those powerhouse spells, can sometimes put me into that position a little bit more than I care to be. And of course, this is definitely the most obvious reason to really just try it out, just go for it. But like by taking out those big, obvious powerhousey type of spells, it also helps make room for other sillier cards, some that you don't usually get to see all that often. And those cards can also be so unexpected that they can be harder for opponents to play around, which is like its own form of a type of advantage in a game too. Savvy players know the usual patterns of like playing around removal, or know to get rid of your big draw engine on the battlefield, for instance. But when I have a Raving Dead in play that's attacking at random, or a Keep Watch that gave me a sudden unexpected burst of card draw in an unusual way, those cards and their unusualness of a game can actually be things that give you a surprising edge sometimes, just because people know less about how to play around them. Plus, it just feels kind of cool to take out a card that I sometimes feel a little bit weird about casting and put in a card that makes me smile every time I draw it. And not only does that feel cool, but it also feels really cool to still manage to win anyway with those type of cards. More and more as time goes on, that's the thing that excites me most about Commander. And as a final note, I guess, if you do cut some card or some cards and then you realize that, no, actually, I do miss those cards, I do want to play those, then cool, no harm, no foul, they can go right back in. There's a deck I've got that I took Dockside out of and I don't particularly miss it there. And then there's a deck that I've got that I took Dockside out of and then I was like, nah, I want it in there for sure. I think cards like that, those cards that make us feel weird, or those cards that are big, obvious powerhouses, they can loom so large in the game that they also occasionally loom large in our minds, and they feel like a big deal, and cutting them would feel like a big deal, but this is just a reminder that honestly, it's not really a big deal at all. I just wanted to make this little video for anyone out there who's noticing those types of moments occur in their own games and who is feeling a little bit weird about it, because it is weird. It can be really hard to judge when a card being good is getting eclipsed by that card not feeling like as much fun anymore. And striking that balance can be really, really tough. You do need some combination of cards that are just good and they're gonna get the job done, but you also don't just want to play cards that don't make you smile either. So if you do have any of those cards that you are drawing and feeling a little bit awkward about, just really feel them out. Ask yourself honestly why those cards are there, and don't feel like the reasons that they're there are necessarily set in stone. Maybe some of those reasons will change on a deck-by-deck basis, for instance. Don't feel like cutting any card would be a bad option, or that it would make you be a bad brewer or a bad player for cutting them. Don't fret too hard on them, because they're not a big deal. You can give something a shot and then undo those decisions a little bit later if you want to. And know also that we get comments like this all the time of people who are struggling with this exact type of thing, so know that it's also a decently common experience too. And of course, for those of you for whom this entire video has been just a totally unrelatable concept, like you never feel any type of weird about any of the cards that you're playing and any of the decks that you are playing as you're playing them, honestly, that's awesome. And for you, the message is exactly the same. The only point that's being made here is just play what you want to play, and that it's kind of cool to be investigative about why it is that we want to play the stuff that we want to play. Because for some folks, it can be a harder line to draw or a harder balance to strike. And we just should all be encouraging of folks to try out the things that they think they might want to explore. And again, it might change on a deck-by-deck basis. Like I said, I've got some decks that love to play the Docksides and the Rifts and all that nasty jazz. And then I also have some decks that I put all of those big powerhouse cards into the first drafts just out of habit, but then being a little bit more critical of my own thought processes there helped me pare things down and discover a whole new level of fun with those decks. If you decide you want to make one of those difficult cuts, that sounds cool. And if you decide that you don't, that sounds cool too. They're both decisions that you should feel empowered to make for yourself. And really, that's it. Let me know if you encounter this feeling at all and which cards you encounter it with, and do you have any tips for navigating it? Hit up the comments, subscribe while you're there, and as always, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.